This is DBChats. I'm Bryce.
I'm Drew.
And we are talking about all things police, fitness, culture, the usual. Today, I'm in charge. So today...
Everything is gonna go wrong.
Probably so,
As a
actually.
warning.
Did you say from a woman?
As a warning.
They said from a woman.
No.
Drew's misogynistic. Just kidding. So today we're going to talk about the Idaho murders.
What about the Idaho murders?
We're going to be talking about the timeline of the events, and we're also going to be talking about some of the resources used by the law enforcement agencies that were involved in order to come to an arrest in the event.
Okay. I honestly have not followed it at all. The most I've gotten is what you have told me at the gym, which I only semi-pay attention because we're at the gym.
Because you have to pay attention to me.
Yes. But can you give me a quick rundown of what I've missed, or are we just going to do the whole thing?
Yeah, so essentially, and we'll go through a timeline, but essentially an overview of this case is that there were 4 college students that were murdered very early in the morning after they had a night out, and essentially law enforcement did not initially know how or why, well, they knew how they were stabbed, but why and who, could have been involved in the incident. So, and it was in a small college town, so it was kind of a shake to that community, and a lot of people were just kind of dumbfounded as to how this could have happened or why it happened, especially obviously families and friends that just didn't have a person of interest in mind or a possible motive in mind as to why someone would want to do this. So let's bring up, we apologize for that brief interruption.
I'm just going to clip that out and splice them together. So.
Drew said as a warning that I was going to mess it up, and he messed it up. So obviously he's talking about editing this moment out. Of course he would.
You can learn to edit at any time.
That'll never happen. Anywho.
All right. Teach me about this one.
I'm about to as soon as I can find my mouse. Okay.
So I didn't know it. I didn't even hear about this until Thanksgiving, if that tells you how out of the loop I have been on it.
Well, it happened on, fun fact, it happened on the 13th. It happened on my birthday. So you only heard about it about a week later.
Yeah.
Or week and a half, 10 days later, something like that.
Yeah.
So let's go over the timeline a little bit just so we all have everything refreshed. It was the murders of 4 University of Idaho students. They were stabbed to death in their off-campus home in Moscow, Idaho, November 13th. And there were a lot of questions from the community, which we'll get into that part as well, but there were a lot of questions in the community because there were not answers for a month and a half, or any leads that were public, that had been given public by law enforcement for a month and a half, which we can talk about that when we get to that portion of it, the differences between or the how law enforcement has to weigh their options between giving information to the public, things that they cannot give as well, but obviously the interest of public safety and why certain things should and could be given out as well. I do want to give the victims' names because I think that they are important to mention. The victims were Ethan Chapin, he's 20 years old. Madison Mogan, she was 21 years old. And I hope that I don't butcher this name. Zaina Kernodle, 20 years old. And Kaylee Goncalves. Goncalves. I'm so sorry.
It's a G, not a C.
Oh, excuse me.
Goncalves.
21 years old. 3 of them lived there, and they were killed. All 4 of them were killed that morning. The investigations had at least 19,000 tips from the community, which is great, but also very, very exhaustive to have to go through. And then it did lead to the arrest of Brian Koberger, who is a 28-year-old PhD student in criminology at Washington State University, which was 8 miles away from the murder scene.
I would just like to say there was 19,000 tips. I can tell you right now, not all tips are good tips.
Oh, absolutely not all tips are good tips. Unfortunately, though, even though not all tips are good tips, they still have to weed through all of that.
Yeah, you can't ignore all of them, especially on a major case like you got a multi-person homicide, and it's deciding what stuff is useful, what stuff's not useful,
right?
And that's gonna eat up a lot of your investigative time. That's why you probably need to. I don't even know how many investigators they might have had on this.
They had multiple agencies. I believe Washington State was helping, along with the small town of.
It's in Moscow.
It was a small department that initially that wasn't used to these types of crimes, obviously.
Right.
And then the FBI was helping as well. So there was a few agencies that were working on the case. I don't know how many law enforcement.
So manpower wasn't really an issue at that point.
Once the FBI is involved, then you've got what you need manpower wise.
Yeah. So.
But yes, like as you were saying, a lot of tips, you're gonna get tips that range from, I saw a suspicious vehicle leaving the area at a high rate of speed at, around the time of the murders, which is going to be a tip you definitely want to follow up on. But then you're going to get something the same as like, oh, well, I was walking my dog 3 months prior and some kid tried to sell me candy and I think that they were being trafficked and that was the murder suspect. Like, it's going to be crazy differences in all of that. And so you've got to weed through, because your law enforcement is going to accept any tip that the community gives them, because they don't want to count anything out initially. But when you do accept any and all tips, especially from a case that's got national news, everyone throughout the country is going to be giving things that may or may not have any relevance to the case whatsoever.
I'm just curious, how many of those weren't even from the area? Because
probably not. A lot of them.
Speaking from firsthand experience, if you ever go to our headquarters and talk, because we have the TV show, they'll get calls from people on the other side of the country calling to complain about something we've done that they saw on TV. And like half the time we're just listening to them, we're just like, why, you don't even know our laws. Why are you even calling us from Nevada or Washington State?
That is, I know.
Alright, I have it fixed.
Okay. Do you think that you can keep your program fixed, please?
I will try my hardest. I got no promises. Bryce is in charge today.
Anyhow. All right. So it does look like a Lada County Magistrate Judge Megan Marshall has issued a non-dissemination order in the case that prohibits law enforcement attorneys and others from communicating with the public or media about the case.
Oh. I wonder why they would do that. I wonder if they actually have enough evidence right now, if they're still gathering evidence.
They probably are, but from what I know of the case, they have a good bit of damning evidence
Yeah.
already, but anyway, we'll go through what we have right now, and then we can discuss why that, that issue as well.
Obviously, we're just going to be guessing and kind of giving a little bit of input, but
Right, we can give speculation, and we can give maybe some educated guesses onto why some of this may or may not be based off of our experiences with the court system and things like that. But we obviously don't know any more than what's being put out to the public as well.
Yeah.
So, on the night of November 13th, two pairs of roommates, they went out separately and arrived home shortly before 2 a.m. Kernodle and Chapin arrived home first, followed by Goncalves and Mogan. According to the affidavit, two roommates who were not killed were also in the home at the time of the murders. The footage from the neighborhood shows a white Hyundai Elantra was seen driving around the townhomes 3 times, beginning just before 3:30 a.m. One of them received DoorDash order at 4 a.m. The same time, one of the surviving roommates, identified as DM in court documents, is woken up by what she said sounded like her roommate playing with her dog upstairs. And then around 4:04 a.m. is when the Elantra made its 4th round around the home. Phone records, which is really interesting, the phone records can tell that Kernodle was on TikTok at 4:12 in the morning. I guess that's some Big Brother stuff here.
that they probably downloaded her phone,
Probably.
and that's how they were able to get all their app data.
Which is something else that we can go into too. The things that law enforcement can do when downloading somebody's phone is insane.
Yeah.
All the way down to things that you think are not there, you think are deleted, and they're actually not. But either way, sometime after 4 a.m., one of the roommates could hear crying from Kernodle's room, along with a male voice saying something along the lines of, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." They say that security camera nearby captured an audio of a whimper, a loud thud, and a dog barking. DM alleges that she opened her bedroom door once more, saw a man with, quote, bushy eyebrows, black clothes, and a mask covering their mouth walk past her. As she stood frozen in shock in the doorway, he walked towards the sliding glass door in the home, and then she went to her room and locked the door. Around 4:20, the Elantra is captured speeding away from the Moscow area. Police did not arrive on scene until noon that day after a 911 call was made to report an unconscious person. They found 4 people dead of stab wounds in 2 separate rooms in the house. After the murders, police initially said that they did not believe there was an ongoing risk to the community, but 3 days later, on November 16th, the Chief James Fry changed the previous assurances and said, "We cannot say that there is no threat to the community." Although police had previously said the attack was targeted, they said that they were not sure whether it is.
Why? Sorry. Why is there a huge gap between 4:20 and 12?
Yes, so that is, I think, one of the ongoing questions in this case is, there's been several things that I've at least seen online where people are asking, why if the roommate heard something at this time, why was there not a call until 8 hours later? I'm not sure. I've read a good bit on it. It has been a few days since I've read anything updated on this, so I don't know if any of these questions have been answered, which it seems from the judge's order that probably not. But the only speculation that I can give at this time, the only thing that would even make sense to me would be that essentially, since earlier in this it's saying that some of these roommates did go out that night, the only thing that I can think is that possibly they were out drinking, came home, and were probably already intoxicated. They get home just before 2 a.m., which I don't know if it's the same in Idaho, but bars typically close here in South Carolina at 2 a.m. And they may have been intoxicated, and she may have been fearful from what she saw, went into her room and locked the door, which is fine. I would that I would recommend going into somewhere, locking yourself in there. I would also recommend calling 911 at that point if you feel as though there's some type of risk in your home. But I wonder if she was afraid, tried to stay quiet, frozen, didn't want to make a sound, and maybe passed out from intoxication. I don't know.
The only thing I can think of is because it's 2 a.m. or 4 a.m. at that point.
Yeah, 4 a.m.
Who knows
correct.
what your roommate was doing if it was a girl and she had a guy over. I mean, you've had girl roommates. You don't just immediately after the guy leaves just go into their room and start chatting with them, especially that late. So I mean, maybe she was like thinking that they were doing something, but if she was sketched out enough to go and like lock the door, then my instinct would be to check the house, make sure everyone's good. But I guess that's just I'm not. I guess not everybody's like me in that sense.
Yeah,
But,
and your instinct would be that, but we're thinking of an 18 to 20-year-old girl who's in being in a woman's mind.
Yeah.
I feel as though she may have, again, I don't know, I'm speculating, but she may have felt scared to herself. But, you know, if you think, right now we're looking at this from the whole picture of knowing what happened.
Yeah.
In that moment, she heard some crying and she heard a man say it's going to be it's okay, or whatever the case may be. So she may have been afraid, like, oh, I don't know who this guy is, so I'm going to go in here and lock my door. But she may have been wrestling with herself and her mind, as in, I'm afraid, oh, am I being ridiculous? Like, maybe she knows him from class, or this, that, and just going back and forth with herself, and didn't want to make it seem like she was being over dramatic by calling 911 or anything like that. Because obviously, like I said, we're looking at this and we're like, why did she not call until noon the next day? They were murdered. She didn't know that at the time.
Right.
She had limited scope
as
of
I'm
information.
processing, I'm just thinking about it because if you're the type of person where your initial instinct when something suspicious is going on is my entire house has been murdered, you've got some real issues. Like that shouldn't be the first thing that jumps to mind. Maybe like something weird's going on. Someone's been doing some sketchy things, but typically a murder is not something that's that common.
Right. So and she's probably thinking in her mind, even if she is scared these wild thoughts might be coming in, she's probably trying to soothe herself and say, okay, I don't want to be like, oh, that sounds crazy, is probably what she's telling herself. So she probably did go in there, try to soothe herself and not try to think that she was jumping to wild conclusions, and then went to sleep, and then unfortunately woke back up at around noon, which would make sense. It's 8 hours. I mean, if she went to sleep it'd be a little bit less than 8 hours if she went to sleep after 4. 7 and a half, something like that, and then wake up and then find probably the most horrific scene that she's ever going to see in her life. So the trauma that happened there is going to be, I'm sure the trauma and guilt that she probably feels now is tremendous, because she saw something, she didn't feel right, like she had a bad feeling. Obviously, if she went in there, she was, as it says, frozen in fear and locked her door. So she knew she had this bad feeling, but she probably talked herself out of it, which I'm not going to blame her for doing so, because like you said, if someone jumps straight to the conclusion that everyone's been murdered, that sounds crazy. So she was probably trying to, like I said, soothe herself, and then she realizes that her gut instinct that something was wrong was correct, and she ignored it. So she's probably going through guilt and blaming herself and things like that. So she's probably going to need a lot of support afterwards to get through this herself.
I wonder if the judge's order to not talk about this has to do with protecting that roommate.
Probably, because the roommate's only identified as DM.
And I think that you know how these giant national cases, when they blow up big like that, you bring in the craziest people who try to harass and just try to get it, because I bet you some people read that and say, this girl's a part of it, like she's an
absolutely.
accomplice, and they're gonna go, and if they knew who she was, they would go and harass her to the point where she's gonna be, I mean, at that point she's not gonna be a good witness for the crime. I mean,
Right. And so people that are not in these situations, or people that don't, the general public that like to read these things and make judgments, not knowing all of the facts and the situation, like you said, they're going to just jump to conclusions, and and even I've seen people say, why didn't the roommate call for so long? I don't think that the police looked at every single lead. Like, why didn't the roommate, which is going to be in one of these that we're going to mention, one of the other articles, why didn't the roommate do more to protect her other roommates? An 18 to 20-year-old girl that's terrified. I'm sorry, she might be legally an adult, but she's a child. She's a college student. What is she going to do to protect 4 other roommates that have been stabbed to death? And one, she doesn't know that, and 2, she's a child herself.
Yeah. So again, I'm just kind of processing this all as we're going through it. So
Right.
my initial gut reaction is that's a huge gap, but
Right.
I mean, the more you kind of parse together and kind of bat back and forth everything, it's like it could end up that way. I mean, I've seen weird things happen, and when I worked on the lower side, we dealt with a lot of college students, and I mean, you could have a kid who's OD'd in the next in their like suite or whatever. It's like a 4-bedroom suite, and one of them will be OD'd for almost a whole day before anybody checks and finds them. So I mean, anything could really happen in these situations, and this,
Right.
I mean, this is the most horrific you could think of. But.
Right. And there's nothing wrong with having the question, obviously. If people first initially read this and they say, weird, this happened at 4 a.m. and this person saw this and the police weren't called until noon, that's a legitimate question to ask, or a legitimate question to have. But what a lot of people online and communities and that, are reading this, they just have to keep in mind, there's a difference between having a question and then just jumping to a certain conclusion afterwards. So questions are fine. It's fine to question things and want more information.
Literally, what we do for a job is ask as many questions as possible.
Right.
Well, let's see what else. Let's continue.
Yeah. So the arrest of him, authorities engaged in a national effort to find and arrest the suspect in the case. They say that he left Idaho for his Pennsylvania family home, Pennsylvania. So it looks like Pennsylvania State Police were also involved. The SWAT team broke down the door, windows in his home in a dynamic entry, formally arresting him, charging him with first-degree murder and 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary. I don't know. Again, this is Idaho, so they've got different laws than us.
Yeah.
But this is South Carolina. I'd also tack on the possession of a weapon during a violent crime.
Yeah, it's hard for us
to know if that's possible or not. Yeah.
Yeah, because Idaho laws are. I mean, in my experience, West Coast. I consider Idaho almost West Coast. It's very close to Washington, like Oregon. So like they're very similar. A little bit more rural, but yeah. I mean, laws on that side of the country are starkly different from the southeast.
Right.
So.
Yeah. If it were South Carolina, we could tack on possession of a weapon during a violent crime. Yeah. So from the police chief again, these quote, "These murders have shaken our community, and I know that no arrest will restore the families or bring these young students back. However, we believe in the criminal process and continue to extend our most sincere condolences to the families." Since November, investigators have been laser focused on pursuing every lead in our pursuit of justice. It was persistent determination and extensive hours spent unraveling this case that led to an arrest. In the days leading to his arrest, law enforcement say that a surveillance team was instructed to watch his movements and told to find an object with DNA that connect him to the crime scene. Investigators found a leather knife sheath on the bed next to Mogan and Goncalves. I'm never going to get that name correct. With DNA that they say is Kohberger's. Police narrowed in on Kohberger after they broadened the search for the white Elantra that had been seen in surveillance. They were able to find one matching description at the Washington State University that was registered to him. Authorities also said that his surviving roommate, the one that we were just speaking about, she gave a description that did match him. Phone records also placed him in Moscow at 4:48 a.m. Agents say that prior to his arrest, he was seen wearing surgical gloves, I didn't actually see this part, outside multiple times and had deeply cleaned the inside and outside of his car. He also went on a cross-country road trip with his father, and by the end of November, he was back in their Pennsylvania home. It was there that authorities obtained DNA from garbage outside of the home and identified that a sample collected was the father of the person whose DNA had been left on the knife sheath found at the murder scene. He was initially held without bond before being extradited to Pennsylvania, from Pennsylvania to Idaho on January 4th. His public defender has said that he was surprised by his arrest, looking forward to be exonerated. He denies any involvement. The public defender also shared a statement on behalf of his family. First and foremost, we care deeply for the four families who have lost their precious children. There are no words that can adequately express the sadness we feel, and we pray each day for them. We will continue to let the legal process unfold, and as a family, we will love and support our son and brother. Authorities haven't identified a motive or identified whether he had any connection to any of the victims. The murder weapon has also still not been located. So it looks like the next hearing is on Thursday, which is this upcoming Thursday. So it's Tuesday. Today that we are recording this is Tuesday the 10th.
Yeah.
So
it'll probably be delayed before we get this uploaded.
Right.
By a few days, so it'll be after that.
The response to the murders, the community. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, it sounds like that they were trailing this dude for a while before they actually were able to make an arrest.
Right. They were surveilling him.
I think when we talked about this previously.
About a week ago, we talked about it with Molly. Yeah.
Like the thing that everyone was saying is like, what took them so long? But it sounds like they had an idea that the guy was. It was just getting all the.
And that's to kind of speak into what I was going to go into a little bit when we were talking about what all they had, all the resources. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of backlash from the community to law enforcement pretty soon after these murders. They don't have a clue who did it. They aren't doing anything about it. They don't know. And that's where we kind of have to, kind of look at the situation and the circumstances, and we have to take into account keeping certain things under wraps because they had somebody in mind. They had a person of interest. I believe he probably was a person of interest at the time, not maybe a suspect quite yet.
If they're going to that extent of following all the way to Pennsylvania and doing surveillance on them on the other side of the country, they probably had a pretty good idea.
That and they probably had an idea. This person.
Could you try
Sarah,
again?
I'm not talking to you.
I'm not.
That they probably had a good idea that this person was involved. Mm-hmm. But in law enforcement, sometimes they cannot give this information out because they cannot jeopardize the case, the integrity of the case, and also let the person of interest kind of be tipped off that they're watching them. But I also understand the community's side as well. Mm-hmm. This person, we still don't think that they have any connection to them. So is this person a public safety risk? I would say so. Because we don't have a motive. We don't have any connections. It seems like he just found some people that he wanted to murder, and we'll get into that. But yeah, in the interest of public safety, I'm sure the community wants to know that they're okay. So I do understand both sides. However, if they were surveilling him, obviously, he's not going to be able to get away with another attack.
Yeah.
Most likely.
So it kind of gets them. I'm kind of torn on this.
Yeah.
Where I don't know if the police actually told the community or if the community just assumed because they haven't put anything out. They have no idea who the murderer is. Or
I think it was the latter.
That was that?
I believe so. From what I was gathering is that there weren't updates that were given to the public thus far. So
they just sort of made assumptions,
uh-huh.
which it's. I think that's the downside of today, is we are so spoiled with getting all of the information immediately, and I'll this is kind of a crude way of putting it, is the justice system is a very archaic and outdated, slow moving organism.
Yeah.
Like, nothing in the criminal justice system works quickly. Between doing investigations, I mean, when you're doing analysis for like either a serologist or drugs, it takes days. Or it takes, I mean, a day or two to get all that stuff done. So yeah, I'd say that. I mean, you could rush and work overtime to get it done, but it takes time. Well,
even in your experience, I'm sorry to cut you off, but even in your experience working in crime scene at our agency, we as an agency are even a little bit more spoiled of getting things done quicker because we have our own lab that we're able to do it with, and we don't have to go through the state lab, which takes even longer.
Yeah, I mean, the little thing about us is we have, like, our lab is very quick, and other smaller agencies that don't have the resources that we do, they'll actually pay more money to have us do analysis for them because they'll get it back. I think our policy is within 10 days, where if you send it to the state law enforcement division, I mean, they'll sit on it for 6 months. They've got backlogs of stuff that I don't even think they're ever going to get to be honest. So,
and that's not to tear apart them as an agency. They do have to, for the most part, they have to process all of the, forensics and everything that comes from the entire state. But it just speaks as to the fact that law enforcement as a whole just doesn't have the manpower in order to keep up with every single criminal case. And things have to be prioritized, which I'm sure this case was very much prioritized. But even with it being prioritized, there is still a wait period. It's not going to be instant, which is what us as society want now. We want everything instant. We want what we want it in this moment, and it just doesn't happen that way.
And well, you work on the road, I work on the investigative side, and I mean, even people on the road, they complain to us about how slow we have to do stuff, but our procedures that we have to follow between getting search warrants, having to get a judge to sign off on it, getting victims to cooperate, getting suspects to either cooperate or not cooperate. I mean, it is a lot of legwork, and it's just tedious things. You have to make sure your ducks are in a row before you can proceed to the next step. And then once you get to that step, you have to make sure all your ducks in a row before you can move on, because any kink in that system, you get anything that you collect after that point is now, they call fruits of the poisonous tree. It's bad evidence, and you could get a breakthrough in the case, and it gets thrown out, and then you'll get something like this where it's a murder. This guy, the key evidence that could put him in prison for the rest of his life, gets thrown out in court, and the jury looks at this and say, well, where's all the evidence? And then it's back to whatever the state says versus what he says, and that's not proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah, so there's 2 points I want to make with that one. Well, I do not envy your job because you have to be so meticulous and everything takes so long, and I don't envy that at all because I'm a very impatient person.
I'm going to interrupt you.
Yes.
I feel bad for the people at the state division because they're also an accredited lab, and as someone who works in an accredited lab, it is frustratingly difficult with how meticulous you have to be on things. Like, I get reports sent back to me for punctuation, like, instead of having a period, it was just, like, very little things, like
a semicolon there.
A semicolon versus a comma, like.
It's ridiculous, yeah. But so I don't envy your job for that reason. And so that is the difference between our divisions, and we've spoke before. If I were to go to a call as being on patrol and being the initial called out officer on for a 911 call for service for, say, a vehicle break-in, if I take fingerprints and DNA evidence from that car, all I have to do is package up the fingerprints that I took, package up the DNA evidence, send it into evidence, and that's all I have to do. What do you have to do if you take fingerprints or DNA evidence from a vehicle that's been broken into as a crime scene investigator?
I have to get all of the victim's information, the incident location, the officer that called me out, the time that I initiated, the case officer who will end up getting assigned it, which I usually half the time I don't even know when I start. All of the vehicle information, tag, color, make, model, VIN. I have to take overall photographs. I have to take colloquially it's called mid-range photographs or up-close photographs. Then I have to write down every piece of every piece that I process. Like if I'm using fingerprint powder, I have to put black powder on, and I have to write down every piece of that card. So if it's the outside of the driver's side door, the inside of the driver's side door, outside of the passenger door, inside of it
the gear shift, the steering wheel, the
I have to
handle for the glove box.
I have to put whether or not I have positive reaction and negative reaction. I have to QC my black powder. I have to, once I get everything done, I have to package everything up. I have to make copies of every single label I make. I have to go and type up an actual written report or typed up report of everything I did on scene that I wrote down, and then transfer it to a nice fancy spread. Document, and then have everything laid out. And just going out to process a car is usually like a 10-page
right.
Report for me.
So that is just kind of to detail the differences between what crime scene investigators have to do, what they have to do to process and put together a report for something that's obviously going to take a lot more time than me. I can certainly go out and process a vehicle, which we typically do as patrol officers, but in a murder, me as a patrol officer, I will never, 0 times out of 10, will I ever process a murder scene. It will not happen. It's not going to happen. It will always, always, always be crime scene. And he's talking about a 10-page report, or you're talking about a 10-page report for a vehicle that was broken into versus an entire apartment or an entire house where there were 4 people murdered. That is going to take a long time.
I complain about this all the time about how much we have to do. It is nice in the end when everything is done. We do it because of our accreditation.
Right.
And which is very important for law enforcement to get to that level for forensics. Mm-hmm. Like that's sort of like the apex. Like there's in South Carolina, us and SLED are the only 2 agencies that are accredited, which is very nice. But when you go to court and you have to testify and they pull up that big thick stack of papers, they have nothing on us when it comes to tearing apart our reports. Like everything is meticulously laid out, is very easy to follow. All the attorneys have to do is read it and say, yeah, they got everything. They have everything photographed, they have everything documented. It is, I mean, when we do our shooting reconstruction, we sometimes will have 30 pages of photographs just on shooting reconstruction so that people can see exactly what trajectories are, where stuff has come from. There's a lot to it. It's a lot of legwork. It is a lot of work up front, but in the end, it makes for a much, much stronger case than some small agency who doesn't have the resources to do this, to put one of their officers or one of their investigators on trial, and they'll say, why do you not have a photograph? Like, where did you find this knife? Did you plant that knife there? Did you do that? Yeah. So it's much better than it's better than the latter.
And that actually comes to the second point that I was going to make as well, which is we have to, or law enforcement investigations, they have to take their time when it comes to these situations. And like you have to wait for a search warrant. You got to do it because if you rush this process and you don't go through the proper channels, you might know, like, hey, I know that this is the house and I need to get into this house and I need to get this out of that house, and your mind might be on the right process. If you don't go through the legal steps that you have to take to get there, then whether or not you found like this knife sheath, if they were to have found that in a residence that say they didn't have the authority to be in without a search warrant or without consent or whatever the case may be, then that would be thrown out, and that has his DNA on it, which is the most damning evidence that they have so far. So in the court system does not care if you can prove something. If you obtain a piece of evidence through an illegal means of obtaining it, if you violate someone's Fourth Amendment right or something like that, search and seizure, then the court will throw that out as what's called as fruits of the poisonous tree. And the entire case could be blown and someone could walk on 4 murders because it wasn't done correctly. So that's something that as a community people should keep in mind. I can't speak too far into the details of this, but we dealt with this similarly in our own agency the other day, where there was someone had asked me to go grab something out of a crime scene that we did not have a search warrant for yet at that time. And I spoke with you, and I spoke with a couple other people because the person that asked me to do this was and I don't think that they didn't mean to. They probably weren't thinking at the time. I'm not trying to say this in a negative fashion, but I just think that maybe they weren't thinking at the time because there were some circumstances that made this a little bit different than a normal case. And I was like, I don't think I should do that. I think I need a search warrant for that. And so we double checked some things and verified that yes, we need a search warrant for that. So, but if I were to go do that without double checking and us getting that search warrant, then that specific piece of evidence that I needed to go get from there would have been thrown out, which potentially could have had DNA evidence that would have wrapped up several crimes in one. So it's just those things are very important, and they do take longer. Search warrants take longer. Crime scene takes longer. Crime scene rotations, whenever you've got to extend a crime scene, takes longer. Sending things through the lab, fingerprints, DNA, CODIS, what's the program where you send fingerprints through? APHIS, yes. All of these situations take longer, but when you do them correctly, it will pay off in the end because, like you said, you go to court, you show that you had everything done the correct way. The defense cannot pick apart your case at that point. They just can't. The best that they can do when you've got a tightly wrapped up case like that, because you've done everything, you've crossed all your T's, you've dotted all their I's, the best they can do is say, hey, if we plea and don't make your victims go through, or the families go through everything again in trial, what kind of plea can we get? That's the best that they can say. They can't fight it.
I mean, we've gotten a lot of those in the past year with our unit, where we had our forensic stuff is on point. We have to go to trial for murders, but most of the time it's usually just for show. The defense is like, all right, we know this is it. They'll go through the motions, and then they'll either try to get a better deal, or however they decide to do it. But it is a long process, and unfortunately, the community doesn't like that. And it's the same when officer-involved shootings. Whenever the investigations are going on, they're not done instantly, because you got to follow all of those steps, and those situations are the worst when it comes to dealing with community relations, because they want the answer now.
Right.
And between us, pathologists and everything, the coroner's office, it doesn't happen instantly. Yeah, we can speed through the process a little bit, but there's a limit to how fast we can investigate things. And in the digital age, you want that information now, because that's what we've grown up with well, at least our age. I mean, we've grown up with the internet. We can get
Right.
any information we want. I go on my phone.
Instantaneously.
Yes. So it's just people have to learn to be patient because the criminal justice system isn't a 21st century entity. It is in America, this is a 18th century entity. Like, you gotta really, really slow it down and consider everything. But I guess let's continue on to the
Yeah, absolutely.
case.
Well, that's kind of what we were going to anyway. Response to the murders. Community commemorated the victims with a vigil at the University of Idaho, November 30th. Memorials can be found at the front of the campus, entrance, as well as Mad Greek, a local restaurant. Scholarships have been created in their honor.
Dollar for dollar donation up to 10,000. That's nice.
Yeah, the family matched dollar to dollar for donations. After an affidavit was released earlier this week, Sheldon Kernodle, a family member of Zana's, asked the public to keep the family in their thoughts. Please think about our family and all of the other families involved. Find ways to support them as well, he wrote. We must continue to remember the ones we lost. We have a long road ahead of us. Steve Goncalves, the father of Kaylee, told CNN that none of these girls deserve this. The real problem we have here is an individual that thought it was okay to attack other human beings. That's what I'm going to focus on. During Thursday's court proceedings, Goncalves also said that Kohberger never turned to look at him. I was hoping for that, he said. He's going to avoid me for a while, but he's definitely going to have to deal with the effects of the aftermath.
So this is more of a positive ending to, as far as the positive reactions of the community. Like
Right. That was
foundations, people having vigils, the family trying to be as positive as possible, which this was okay. Yeah, this is the one I found. I didn't go through this. You went through it more than I did.
Yeah. Which you can probably speak. Well, I mean, you're on the crime scene side of it, so you can probably speak to some of the forensics used and things like that. There is some more of investigative process, which are crime scene investigations, but then there's also investigators that kind of take over the case and you deal with the forensics issues and stuff like
so
that.
there's forensics and then there's normal investigations. So a lot of agencies don't use sworn officers for forensics. I mean, half of my unit is they're not sworn officers.
Right.
So
however, in ours we do. You're a sworn officer
in
in crime scene investigations.
Yeah, but there's a lot of stuff that other people do that don't fall under forensics, at least in our unit.
Mm-hmm.
So like picking phones, doing that stuff. A lot of times they'll have to get search warrants for phone records through the different carriers and stuff like that. So it's a different process.
Right. So that's also, I know I say this a lot, but just as a reminder, 'cause we are only speaking off of our experience.
Yeah.
Again, different states have different laws, and even within our state and within states, there's different agencies that have different policies and run things, within the law, but they just run them differently. So we just speak off of our experience and how, we run our agency.
As far as law enforcement goes, at the federal level, it's basically the Constitution. That's about it. Individual states write almost all of their law. Every law that you abide by, whether it's murder all the way down to stealing a candy bar from the gas station, those are all laws made at the state level. Mm-hmm. So their wordings, their policies, their procedures usually is done at a state level, and then individual agencies can kind of add on to that.
Yeah. So this article here talks more about like what they did to identify him and how they made a case against him.
Right.
Which, in reference to the judge's order about not speaking with the community, I wonder why they're allowed to give this much. Maybe this was prior to that. I don't know.
Well, if they had the judge, that was probably very recently, because they said they arrested him on the 30th, and then they just extradited him recently.
The 4th, I think they did.
Because they said they arrested him on the 30th in Pennsylvania.
He was extradited from Pennsylvania to Idaho on the 4th,
So that judge's decision was sometime between the 4th and now. So.
Yeah. So this information must have been released prior to. Yes, he was arrested on December 30th.
So, what's the date on the other article? Is there a date on it?
January 8th.
So it must have been sometime after that they put a hush on it.
Did they put the order?
Yeah.
Well, this article was written on. Yeah, January 8th as well, 7:15 p.m. versus 5 a.m. So maybe sometime between 5 a.m. and 7 something p.m. on this day.
Yeah. So. But, yeah, let's go through. I mean, I'm actually very curious about how they did this. I mean, it says a lot about solving crimes in the 21st century. Right, and
it seems like there was a lot of video evidence that at least like started off the investigation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there were other things that obviously had to come into play afterwards, but video is just something that I saw over and over and over again in this case. Security cameras, internet video streams, cell phone towers. Police traced the digital footprint of the victims and the man accused of killing them in exhaustive detail. Authorities tracked down the suspect's car in his college parking lot, backtracked his cell phone's movements for 6 months, and even figured out that what time one of the victims was using TikTok on her phone, which we discussed that already.
Yeah.
They used a video stream from a food truck to help determine where 2 of the victims had been earlier in phone records to figure out who gave them a ride home. Investigators worked long hours to crack the case. Technology sped things along dramatically, including thousands of digital uploads processed by the FBI. Without a murder weapon, motive, or anyone seeing the killer's face, authorities were able to make extraordinary use of advancements of technology to piece together the mystery. That's where I was a little confused with them saying without someone seeing their face, because the roommate did.
The roommate should have.
So I was a bit confused when I read that.
They got bushy. They said he was wearing a mask, but she saw bushy
eyebrows. Yes.
So
maybe they meant not his entire face. It may have been pulled up to just under his eyes. That may be what that's referring to. But I read some of these quotes, so we can dive into some of these quotes because some of these are interesting that I have responses to. From the Los Angeles County prosecutor, Joshua Ritter, he said, I think it goes to this idea that there is no perfect crime in this day and age. It is, for the most part, a fairly circumstantial case, and building that kind of case requires you to build this kind of tapestry of evidence, which they have done here in a very remarkable way, which is true. I do think a lot of things are circumstantial. However, they did have that DNA on a knife sheath at the scene.
Yeah.
So I do want to make sure that that is not forgotten, because it seems as though this isn't mentioned as much in this article, at least the beginning that I read.
Right.
Experts like Mary Fanner, professor at the University of Washington School of Law, she called the police work a perfect case study in modern investigative techniques. A well-known... This is the one that I wanted to critique.
Said others expressed caution. Above.
Yes. This is what I wanted to critique. A well-known Colorado defense attorney, Iris Etten, said she thought the newly released charging document reflected a police department desperate to make an arrest without considering other possible suspects or exploring why the surviving roommates didn't do more to help their friends. This is what I was talking about earlier, when we're going to make a rush judgment against a 18 to 20-year-old girl who does not have the facts that we have right now. Right. Do more to help her friends when she didn't even know what was happening at the time. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I don't like that comment. I feel like this is on almost blaming the victim type of comment in this situation. And of course, it's going to be coming from a defense attorney who's going to be looking at this through a lens of she's defending the person that they have. But with what they have, I don't have a problem with the fact that they already made an arrest. should they continue investigating and continue trying to build their case? Absolutely, as far as they can.
Yeah, I still need to go through all of the information to see what what the first article showed. Sure, yeah, they did it. They've done a pretty good amount of work to get that. The thing is if you kind of think about it all the way down to when you're dealing with circumstantial evidence, unless you explicitly get somebody on camera committing the crime that you can show a jury, you can argue in pretty easily any evidence you find is circumstantial. I mean, you could get somebody's fingerprints, a murder weapon, everything down, like in somebody's possession, and then you can make an argument that that's circumstantial. You know what I mean? And like I said, unless you have video footage of the crime being committed, which I mean we do get that a lot nowadays.
Yeah, that happens.
We've had a lot of murders happen on camera in our jurisdiction, but I think that's part of the 21st century being spoiled with all of this technology. The assumption is now it has to be on camera, and anything other than that is circumstantial.
Right. And the difference is could someone argue it's circumstantial for DNA to be on a knife sheath? Yeah, sure. If they were best friends and he had spent a lot of his time there, it could absolutely be argued that, yeah, his DNA would be in that apartment.
Right.
But at this point, nobody knows that they have ever had any contact. And that's also pretty easy to refute. If they've got cell phone records, they can see if they have communicated on social media, text message, on the phone. They can see that type of stuff. Friends and family can determine whether or not that they've known this man, if this man has ever been over there for whatever reason, or if they can check and see if they've ever had any classes together, if they've ever crossed paths when it comes to schoolwork and things of that nature. And these surviving roommates. I mean, that's also two other people that actually live there can absolutely say whether or not they know of this person being in their own home before. Right. So using that argument, it's going to be pretty difficult to use as an argument in favor of Kohberger, because it doesn't seem so far that he had any reason to have his DNA inside that apartment.
Right. And you got to look at the totality of circumstances. That's one of the first things they teach you in law enforcement is take everything into consideration and you build your case on as much information as possible. You're never going to solve a case with just one piece of circumstantial evidence. You have to create an entire case, and I like the way they actually said it, a tapestry of evidence to paint a picture of what happened.
Right. So from what I've seen thus far, I think that they have really done their work here, but we can continue out this and see. Extensive hours spent unraveling this case. Authorities were able to access extraordinary amount of information, allowing them to piece together videos and pieces of data to unravel what happened in the early morning hours of November 13th. You're looking at a combination of newer, sophisticated technology combined with old-fashioned police work. Authorities found the suspect's phone was turned off or put into airplane mode for 2 hours, bracketing the attack. So I think this is important. They got cell phone records showing that he'd been in the area of the attacks at least 12 times in previous several months, almost always late night, early morning hours. And they got records showing that he apparently drove past the scene of the crime the next morning while the two surviving roommates slept unaware of the carnage around them. This is important. This man is a PhD student in criminology. Would I argue, I don't have a PhD. I have a bachelor's in criminology. I would say that we learned, actually, I told you the other day, your lieutenant actually taught some of my, your lieutenant in crime scene actually taught some of my classes, my forensic chemistry class. He He was a guest instructor several times. But so did we learn about crimes and different ways that crimes could be processed or investigated? Yes. We learned other things. We learned about everything to do with the judicial system all the way through whatever. So would I say that criminology, particularly, again, on the bachelor level, not the PhD level, taught me how to try to commit the perfect crime? No, I wouldn't say that. But now I will say he's past bachelor's and master's and on to his PhD. So could he have learned a thing or two? I'm sure. And if he's obsessed with this and he looks into all of this and has done his research, sure. I do think that it's very interesting that police do use cell phone tracking a lot when it comes to crimes and whatnot, and that his phone was turned off for 2 hours, or either turned off or put in airplane mode for the 2 hours that the crime occurred, yet a vehicle matching his vehicle description was seen driving through the area multiple times, and yet also his cell phone tracks in the area at least, what does it say, 12 times in the last 6 months, or the past several months. So I just find that also, this is circumstantial, but it doesn't look good.
No. And I will say this, so, again, my girlfriend's in academia.
Yes.
Currently, she's getting her PhD. People in academia are just weird. They really are.
I'm going to tell Molly you said that.
I tell her she's weird all the time. But I've met people they're doctors or they're getting their PhDs, and it's, I don't want to leave it as that they're weird, but when you get to that level, what the stuff that you would do that we would consider like criminology is different. Like they're going to be looking more at the macro level, so they're going to be looking at statistics. They're going to be doing research on the psychology, what causes crime, those kind of things, not individual cases, the micro. They want to look at the big picture of everything. That's where like a lot of the PhD, like where research comes into play. As far as small time, like how to investigate stuff, I really find that that's more of what people in the field do, not because once you get out of academia, it's you don't typically go back into it. So if you're somebody who's on the scene and you're working in, like for a department, or you're doing consulting work, you're not going to go back and then go into research. It doesn't typically work that way. The techniques that we use, because obviously I had to read a lot of books in forensics. A lot of the stuff that they teach, most of it is done by people who work in the field and who has made that their business, is teaching these processes. I mean, companies, if you go to like any sort of conferences or seminars, you'll see private companies, they're trying to sell their state-of-the-art technology and products to agencies. Well, obviously they do it for profit incentive,
right? But
a lot of these breakthroughs in new technologies are done through, not through universities, but more through these companies trying to sell their products, or actual people on the scene using the products and how to make that happen. So it's a little bit different, saying because he's a PhD in criminology. I guess he must have had a lot of classes in police up to that point, but his focus isn't typically on the micro; it's on the macro, the statistics and everything around it. That's my long-winded speech of saying people in academia are weird.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm sure Molly will appreciate that segment.
Yeah, it's fine. She'll get over it.
However, that does not look good for him.
No, it does not.
The breadth of videos garnered in the probe may have even captured a portion of the attack itself, after an audio recording from a nearby security camera picked up a distorted audio of what sounded like voices or a whimper followed by a loud thud. Noting a dog could be heard barking afterwards, which may have been when the roommate woke up, because she did say that she thought that she heard her roommate playing with the dog. As a small army of local, state, and FBI investigators zeroed in on Brian Kohberger, They also tracked his car's cross-country journey and rifled through his parents' trash to extract DNA evidence that they say puts him at the crime scene. He is a PhD student at Washington State University in Pullman, which is about 10 miles away from Moscow, which is not unheard of. And this is nothing new that police, once you set your trash out. Now, if it's like on your porch, you haven't taken it out to the dump, things like that, that's different. Once you've set your trash out to the curb to have a public trash service take it away and haul it off, it is no longer expected. There is no longer an expectation of privacy when it comes to your garbage, because you are getting rid of it, abandoning it, so on and so forth. And so a search warrant is not needed at that time. And I imagine that they did that because maybe they either, one, didn't feel they had quite enough to get a search warrant yet at that time, or they didn't want to tip him off by getting a search warrant and notifying that they needed his DNA. So they rifled through the trash. They were able to get his father's DNA, and DNA evidence can give you familial references as well, or hits as well. So, but that's nothing new. Police have been doing that for a while, and I think it was a good move for them.
I'm pretty sure the Supreme Court has even ruled on going through people's trash because people would consider, oh, that's my property. But once it's on the side of the road, I mean, at that point, it's no longer yours. It's whoever. Yeah,
you're getting rid of it, and you're asking a public service to take it away and dump it into a field. Is it your property then? No.
So it's sort of when it no longer becomes your property. Which, once you put it on the side of the road, all bets are off. I mean, I really haven't seen it here in South Carolina, but where I'm from in upstate New York, they actually we call them trash pickers. They basically just drive around in like pickup trucks, and they just go through people's trash taking stuff.
Things that they want.
Yeah, and it's always like random things like furniture, or like when it's like the week of spring cleaning where everyone's putting all their big stuff on the side of the road. I've seen people. I'm not lying. People have rented out like dump trucks and filled it with stuff that they want off the side of the road. People have built contraptions. It is impressive. I'm gonna have to ask my mom to take pictures next time, because
shoot, you might be able to really do well with that if you go to a wealthy neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, up there wasn't as much money as there is in like a city like we deal with, but it's just kind of funny. I mean, weird, the trashmen.
It's persistent, again, another quote from the chief, this persistent determination, extensive hours spent unraveling this case led to an arrest. Okay, how Idaho police untangled a mystery using TikTok DoorDash cameras. In the hours and days after the attack, police asked area residents to send in tips and video that they had. By November 25th, they asked other law enforcement agencies to watch for a white 2011 to 2016 Hyundai Elantra, which was spotted on surveillance cameras in the neighborhood. So that's also how the community can help. Like, we're talking about these tips and how we have to weed through things that aren't going to be helpful, but that's how the community can help. I mean, there's several neighbors and things in the situation. Ring doorbell cameras have done so much for law enforcement since they have come out. I say Ring, but all of the brands of these cameras.
Chime.
Well, whatever they're called now, they've done a lot for law enforcement in situations like this, because you just catch random crimes. So I'm sure that was it was a huge help, because that's how they start looking for the vehicle description. 3 days later, a Washington State University police officer working in an overnight shift used his access, because again, this was 10 miles away from 8 to 10 miles, I can't remember.
To 10 miles.
Away from where the crime occurred. So this Washington State police officer was working in an overnight shift, uses access to the university's campus vehicle registration database to find a vehicle matching that description. 20 minutes later, his colleague found the car parked outside of Koberger's apartment. So that was just at random. I mean, the chances of that working just...
Here's what I found.
I'm so sorry.
Siri
is just all up in this. But the chances of that working, I mean, he just decided to just give it a try, and it ended
And
up
honestly,
working out.
that's where a lot of stuff comes from. Is like someone who's like, I wonder if this is related. I mean, we've done that before, and some of the stuff that we've worked in, it's like, oh yeah, maybe that's something that could be involved, and it turns out to be a small piece of the bigger puzzle.
Absolutely. It's that moment that police first mentioned Koberger's name in their lengthy arrest documents released this week. The discovery appeared to open a new phase in the probe, and the authorities worked backwards, tracking both the owner and the car's movements the night of the attack. Investigators previously acquired data on every cell phone in the vicinity of the attacks, but his was not amongst them because his phone was turned off and or on airplane mode. Now armed with the knowledge of the matching car that has been in this area, investigators on December 23rd asked AT&T to give them all of his location data for the last 6 months. Mm-hmm. So that's really important as well, because, you know, it's going to raise flags. Why was his car in the area?
I'm not sure I understand.
For the love. Why was his car in the area, but, you know, his phone wasn't? Or is cut off. So, and again, if his phone would have been maybe moving around his apartment or going to a restaurant or something like that, they may not have been as concerned with it. But like, weird, during these 2 specific hours in the middle of the night, the phone was on, cut off, on again, and when it was on again, it was still in the Moscow area. Mm-hmm. Very suspicious. So asking to get the data for the last 6 months was a good move for them, because then they were able to determine that you know, that phone was around these victims for 12 other times in their residence, 12 other times in the last few months. This is done by subjects in an effort to avoid alerting law enforcement that a cellular device associated with them is within a particular area where a crime is committed. This is what the Moscow Police Department corporal wrote in the affidavit. As they tried to find the killer, police used video clips, social media posts to track down the victim's movements the previous evening. One clip that they received widespread attention was Goncalves and Mogan visiting a food truck. Their presence captured on a live video feed, usually used by patrons to see how long the lines are. Police said that the footage gave them a time and a place, allowing them to track the victims to establish more of a timeline. This is a map of the city of Moscow. By 2 a.m. the morning of the attack, all 6 people inside the home were in their rooms. Investigators determined that they also knew that Kernodle was waiting for a DoorDash food delivery, which arrived around 4 a.m. Which that is interesting, because it was between 4 a.m. and 4:20, I believe, is when this occurred. Right. Because 4:20 his vehicle was leaving the area. So I wonder, did he somehow get in with the DoorDash delivery driver? And how do you stab? It's different, obviously, using a gun. That's pretty instant. There's no struggle, so on and so forth. Right. How do you stab 4 people to death within 20 minutes? That's pretty crazy.
I mean, he must have caught them off guard. That's the only thing I think of. I don't know where the injuries, how much they've been stabbed, but stabbings aren't usually they're not the quietest, and they're not the quickest ways to kill somebody, because it's not like unless you really get in there, you're not gonna you're gonna more or less just gonna cause somebody to bleed out.
Right. And again, the victims could have been not on their, I guess, A game when it comes to reactions, if they were intoxicated or they had been drinking and things of that nature.
I would be surprised if some of them might have been asleep when it all happened. They just got killed in their sleep. Right.
It is just interesting for something like that to occur within 20 minutes. It's just, it's pretty crazy. So investigators say they believe the killings happened in the next 25 minutes. So actually what we were just talking about. Although one of the surviving roommates reported seeing a tall, masked man, bushy eyebrows inside of the home, but apparently didn't tell anyone calling 911. Police had little to go on. That changes. They use security camera footage to track the vehicles entering an otherwise a quiet residential area. A breakthrough in the case came with the white sedan. Footage from one camera shows a white sedan repeatedly driving past the home, arriving in the area the last time around 4:04, and then leaving at a quote high rate of speed at 4:20. According to the documents. Because officers didn't see a front plate, an FBI agent who specializes in vehicle identifications examined the video and concluded that it was likely a 2011-2016 Hyundai Elantra sedan. This thing's in my way.
I don't know what to do about it. Scroll down more? No. I guess not.
Well, that's rude.
Yeah.
Where's the X?
I don't see one. Guys, don't get Vivian.
Yeah, Vivid's still pissing me off. We were just talking. Hold on. Didn't I just mention security?
Mm-hmm.
These cameras?
Yeah.
Just saying.
Yeah, no, it's not. It's. We all know Jeff Bezos listens to all of us. It's not a secret anymore.
True. But now Vivint's pissing me off, so I'm not going to recommend Vivint because they want to be in the way of my article here. So I'm going to try to determine what this is talking about with Vivint in the way. Investigators.
It has to do with them going back to the
Washington State University campus.
At 5:25 a.m.
Yeah, so it was apparently a scene in the area, or was back in the area of the campus at 5:25 a.m. It's unclear exactly when police viewed that camera footage. So I guess there was camera footage that determined that. Although the public didn't yet have the description of the suspect provided by the surviving roommates, police said that they could see that he fit the profile. Tall, thin, and with bushy eyebrows. Now, I will say that's not a very good description. So that's obviously extremely generalized, and that's not a very good description. However, it still fits with what they were looking for, along with everything else, like you said. A lot of everything else supports. I guess this could just go to support more of their evidence. When police reviewed his cell phone location history, they stated that he had been near the victim's home at least 12 times in the preceding months, and once again a few hours after the killings. So
it sounds like he targeted them.
Yes.
Or somebody in that house.
All the police work to that point was circumstantial evidence. Nothing yet tied him to the house itself. The cell phone location data analyzed by Moscow police did not provide specific locations, only general areas. But there was the DNA. Left behind at the house after November 13th, the attack was a sheath for a large fixed blade knife. On that sheath was enough DNA material to develop a profile. It's unclear how long it took for the authorities to develop that profile, but it was useless without someone to compare it to, which is very true. For DNA, you can have a profile for DNA if it's not in the CODIS system for suspects that DNA has been placed into that system, then, or you don't have a suspect that you have obtained their DNA to compare it to, then it's nice to have, but it's useless, as it says, without a comparison.
So they can get reverse hits on stuff like that, but generally speaking, we like APHIS more for fingerprints, because it's a much older system. It's not as much of a new technology. I mean, we've discovered fingerprints since the 1800s. I mean, it's a very old method, and we've had that for as long as we've been able to make those sort of databases. So just because there's so much more in it, and it's I mean, you get fingerprint for everything nowadays. I mean, you get a job working as a teacher, working at a hospital. We get fingerprint. Everybody gets fingerprinted nowadays. So it's just there's just so much more in that database to go off of. And
fingerprint evidence is slightly more reliable than DNA, because DNA, I don't know if it's well known, but DNA, identical twins can still have the same DNA, whereas their fingerprints will still be different.
Yep.
So fingerprint is the actual only absolute 100% difference between every person that is born. Whereas DNA still isn't, even though it's still a very, very, very small probability.
It's better when you can run a comparison. If you can get your sample plus something to compare it to, that's the best way of doing it.
Yeah.
And a lot of that comes with having an idea of who you're looking for.
Yeah. But this DNA evidence is still the most damning because I have not read anything that Mr. Koberger has a twin. So I think we're good here.
Fair enough.
But left behind at the house after November 13th, I think I just read this. So a quote from that former prosecutor, all of that evidence, even with the eyewitness evidence, down to the cell phone, down to the car, really is just corroborating the DNA. All along, the very large elephant in the room would be the DNA on the knife sheath.
Yep.
Obviously, as we were speaking. Unresolved questions, unclear motive. Days after the attack, Koberger switched the license plates on his car. For months, he'd been driving around with a Pennsylvania plate on the back, but not the front. On November 18th, he registered the car in Washington State, got new plates. A few weeks later, he drove back home to Pennsylvania with his father. License plate reader caught the car as it entered into Colorado. Body cam footage released by Indiana State Police this week shows a trooper stopping Koberger and his father with Washington plates on the Hyundai. On December 15th, authorities in Indiana said they weren't looking specifically for him at the time. He was released without being ticketed. Interestingly, so in South Carolina, we do not have to have plates on the front of we don't have plates on the front of our vehicles, only on the back. I do know that there are states that require the front and the back, and I'm assuming that Pennsylvania.
It's a very
is one of those states.
It's a very southeast thing to only need the back.
To only need the back, yeah.
Because back home, all the states around me in the Northeast, you need front and back. And to my knowledge, West Coast is pretty much the same way. I'm not sure. I don't. I know it sounds mean to say, but the Midwest is flyover country. I've never really stopped there, so I couldn't tell you what their laws are like.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for anybody who lives in the Midwest. You just get cooler stuff, I guess.
As Koberger spent time with his family back home in Pennsylvania, authorities were close by. On December 27th, just days after tracing his cell phone records and linking his vehicle to the crime scene, investigators snatched trash from outside his parents' home in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. They produced a DNA profile the next day, finding that a man who lives there was 99.9% certain to be the father of the person who left DNA on the knife sheath. And authorities got the DNA report on December 28th. So that was pretty quick.
Yeah, just
27th to the 28th.
Yeah, they rushed that.
That was definitely a rushed sample.
That was an overnighter right there.
Yeah. Koberger was arrested the next day. This is still a skeleton of evidence they have, but just in reading this looks like a tremendously strong case because they did that police work. On their own, these things might be suspicious, but when you start putting them all together, they start to build into probable cause and what you need to secure an arrest warrant, which is what they got. Mm-hmm. Despite the assortment of evidence, there's still holes and questions in the case. Authorities have yet to publicly establish any motive or say whether he knew the victims. Police also have not disclosed why the students' fellow roommates did not call authorities or why they weren't alerted until nearly 8 hours after the killings. The Colorado defense attorney, who I love so much from his initial quote, we'll see what he has to say, cautioned against a rush to judgment in the case. She said that police usually put their best evidence into an arrest affidavit, and court documents released by authorities have a lot of holes. She said that there are many reasons why someone's DNA could present on an item in a stranger's house, and there's no evidence to say whether he had been in that house before. What's seen in an affidavit is usually the best evidence, and what's noticeable here is what's missing. There's a lot of conclusions to reach that aren't backed up. She recently represented a man accused of killing his wife and said in that case, investigators' reliance on cell phone data later proved inaccurate. Prosecutors have dropped charges against the man largely because his wife's body remains missing. It's important to keep an open mind, and it doesn't appear law enforcement has done that, she said. They honed in on this white car and worked back from there. Which, I will try to be as open-minded as possible, but I think that her quotes are nothing but her own bias for defendants in the case. I think that they've done an excellent job. You're not going to have, in any investigation, short of a video evidence just following someone through an entire case and incident occurring, you're not going to have all of the answers to every single question. Right. Not in a suicide, not in a murder, not in a sexual assault, without, short of a complete, like I said, video from someone being followed in the entire incident, or short of someone just confessing exactly what happened.
Right.
So that doesn't mean that without just video of everything or without a confession to everything, that crime, we just don't arrest people when we have such an abundance of evidence that they have here. So I strongly just don't agree with the statements that she's making. And I understand that she's a defense attorney and her job is to defend people and try to, but in this case, all she's doing is providing a legal opinion. She's not representing this man, and I just believe that her comments are made strictly off of her bias as an attorney.
So,
as a defense attorney,
I'll continue, but I'll kind of cut against you on this a little bit. So, yeah, that's her job. She's a defense attorney. Her job is to provide skepticism in what we do. Now, it's hard to say this as somebody who's in law enforcement and who this is like sort of the people who represent the people that we put in jail. You need people like her in the system, because if you don't have that pushback, eventually you'll get to a place where you're just doing some extrajudicial stuff, and we don't want that as a society. We do need a check and balance in law enforcement.
Absolutely.
And I think that public defenders or defense attorneys provide that. Her job, I think her opinion definitely is skewed in that direction. I also want to take into consideration that we don't have all of the information because the judge put a hold on any more information being disseminated to the public. So she doesn't have any information more than what we have.
Correct.
So sure, there could be some holes in it, but it sounds like they got the information on the car, which was random. I'll give her that. So I think she's right in that sense. But a lot of evidence came from that.
Right.
And putting somebody's DNA or prints or anything inside of a house that they don't know anybody or they're not supposed to be in contact with or something like that, it's not a good sign.
Right, absolutely.
I don't know. I'm trying to see.
Which part are you looking back towards?
She said there are many reasons why someone's DNA could be present on an item in a stranger's house. Meh. The only thing I think of is like something from Facebook Marketplace. But I mean, you would have to go through and I guess like see if this person has bought a K-bar or whatever knife he used to.
And it'd also be interesting, and like again, there's been a stop to everything else, but whatever knife is supposed to be in this sheath, I'm sure they can figure out what type of knife that is. They can get the measurements, they can get the dimensions of it, and then see if that matches the stab wounds in these individuals. If that knife is missing, the sheath is in the house, and it matches the stab wounds on those victims, it's pretty not good.
No. And I can tell you right now what we don't have and what she doesn't have is the pathology report, because that usually takes time and that usually stays in, that comes out during discovery. Same with the forensic report. So this is kind of like the summary that they've made public. Like we do, our department does the same thing when it comes to forensics. But the actual details is that's going to come out in discovery. And the phone records, they gave us what they want to give us,
right?
But I'm sure there's a lot more within those phone records that'll help illuminate things. For all we know, it could put holes in the case. For all we know, but this is what we have so far. We don't have the total picture, so she said there are some holes, but that's stuff that's going to come out in discovery. That's something that's going to have to work out. Obviously, they're interviewing him. They're working with his defense attorney, and they're going to want his side of what all of his reasons are for all of this circumstantial evidence.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot is going to really determine of how his interrogation comes through, as far as determining whether or not he can provide answers for all of these. I mean, there's it's a gish gallop, you know what that is, like throwing a lot of information out at once, hoping something kind of will stick.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of good gish gallop, I'll give him that, but it's going to be a lot for him to answer before we can make a
He's going to have to provide answers to a lot of things. He's going to have to provide answers to him being in the vicinity of their home 12 times in the last several months. He's going to have to provide answers to his phone being cut off during this specific time frame, and then when it's cut back on, it being in Moscow. He's going to have to provide answers to his car not being at his place until 5-something in the morning, just after these murders. He's actually going to have to provide answers to his car being seen there after the murders, again, or his phone being tracked there in the early morning after the murders back there too. He's going to have to provide answers to, not as much, but just in the middle of it, you know, someone generally just matching his description being in there. And he's going to have to provide answers to his his DNA being on there inside of the apartment. So, and then whatever else we don't know. Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of answers that he's gonna have to give.
I mean, I'm just thinking because, well, I grew up in a smaller community, and like a lot of these smaller towns, you don't really travel between them because, especially in small towns. Yeah, sure, there's not much in your small town. There ain't much in their small town either.
Yeah.
So there's really no reason to travel between these communities that often unless you know somebody there or or have a reason to be over there. I think that a lot of the cell phone data that would be nice to know is whether or not, is he going there and stopping to see people? Is he going there to do things with somebody?
Is he driving down the street, or is he
just doing laps around the town and leaving? I mean, I think that would be weird, but if he's like just matching them hard on Tinder and just they all happen to be in Moscow, maybe that's what he's doing there. I mean,
yeah.
But
and everybody has biases. I know that I'm looking through my bias lens. You're looking through your bias lens, and everyone's going to look through based off of their experiences and so on and so forth. It's just interesting that this defense attorney is not even at all recognizing the fact that this. I mean, no matter how you look at it, this is still damning evidence. Yeah. There might be holes. Absolutely. There's going to be questions that are answered, but I mean, there is damning evidence that he needs to answer for, or I mean, I guess he doesn't have to answer for it, but it just doesn't look good.
Yeah. But is there anything you want to use to cap this one off today?
I can't wait to see what happens. I hope that this case is, or that this trial is public. Because it doesn't seem like we're gonna get more. It doesn't look like we're gonna get any more information until the trial, because of the order. Which, as much as everybody wants more information, it's most likely a good thing, because another issue that these types of cases that get nationwide coverage presents is once there's a trial, I feel very sure there's going to be a jury trial when it comes to this. It's very difficult to get jurors in this type of trial who haven't seen things about the case and don't already have a bias coming into this, because in the judicial process you need to have jurors that are not already biased against or for him in this case. Everything that's coming out, which is what we're talking about, what we're speculating on, looks damning towards him, but we don't need jurors that have seen this stuff that looks damning towards him going into this case, because then it's not a fair trial, and we need juries that are impartial and for a fair trial. So that does make this stuff difficult. So that is the positive side of the judge issuing this order. So no more of this information can be disseminated as they prepare for a trial in this case. I selfishly would like to see that the trial be public, because I obviously want to see what's going on. I want to, find out what information we don't know and all of that. On the flip side of it, it still is what we have to understand is we are interested in this. People are interested in this situation, but there are real victims and real families to victims in this situation. So the more this trial is going to be extremely difficult for the families of these victims from these murders to go through. And their family members' murders have already been covered nationwide. So they're having to deal with this grieving process in the public eye already. So even further, the trial, if it were public, they would have to deal with all of that and more grieving. This is going to be even worse on them for the trial and having to go through this and seeing pictures and hearing details of a gruesome murder of their family member. And for that to be public as well could be more difficult on the family. So I'm not trying to seem insensitive in that fashion as well. So that's just two different sides of it, of wanting to know the details on our end of it, but then also understanding the people that this is their life that they're going through.
Yeah. And historically, cases or trials that get this national attention typically don't go well for the victims.
No.
I mean, O.J. Simpson, mind you, that was a massive failure at every level. Casey Anthony was the second one I was going to say. Like, that one, it seemed like a pretty slam dunk case, but I mean, once it hit the national spotlight and there's a lot of media attention on it, it seemed like things started to crumble after that point. And it becomes a theme, it seems like. A lot. I
will say Daryl Brooks. That case went very... No, didn't go well for the victims at all because there were people that were killed. However, that defendant, and I respect the judge in that case, and the defendant, Daryl Brooks got what he deserved in that case. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. It just seems traditionally that's the publicized, like heavily publicized cases usually end up getting not guilty verdicts, which, again, until discovery happens, we don't have much other than what they put out, and with the judge's order, we're not going to get anything else until then. And as we've explained earlier, the justice system is very slow, so it's going to be several months before we get anything more for this. So.
I mean, it could be a year before the trial, or longer.
I have a feeling that because of the media attention, they're going to kind of fast track it through the system.
I certainly hope so.
They're not going to do like what they usually do and just, we'll continue this, we'll continue this, we'll continue this.
I certainly hope so, because these 4 murder victims, 4 families that deserve to get to put at least this trial part behind them. They're not going to ever put these murders behind them, obviously.
No.
But this trial is going to be very, very difficult for them.
Yeah.
And I think, obviously, I'm sure the prosecutors are already preparing them for that. Already telling them this is going to be very difficult, because they should be prepared for that, to understand what they're about to go through. So right now they're anxiously waiting to go through even more trauma in order to get as much justice as what the government can provide for them as a result of this. So I hope they don't have to anxiously wait for this too long.
No. But, well, that being said, we are DBChats, and
we'll be back.
If you have any questions, leave a comment. We will try to get to all of them, and well, I might not, but you most definitely are going to be following this until the very end. And,
certainly so.
And next time we get any sort of update, we will bring it to you guys.
Yeah, so like and subscribe.
Yeah.